Добрий день, працює Медіа-центр України. Мене звати Василь Самохвалов, і ми сьогодні будемо говорити про...
Good afternoon, Media Center Ukraine. I am Vasil Samokhvalov. We'll talk about civil society. As Classic said, Ukraine is not Russia, and one of the features that distinguishes us from Russia is the well-branched out civil society. The war has started, and we have to understand where they are, how they influence the powers that be or not, how the donors impact on this. We have the guest Valeriia Skvortsova, who is the executive director of the Ukrainian Independent Center for Policy Research. Oleksandra Hlyzinska, who is the head of the board of Respublika Institute, who is the founder of Active Community Organization, and Evelina Kurilets. She's the executive director of my favorite charity foundation, Razom for Ukraine. We are also waiting for Maksym Latsyba from the Ukrainian Independent Center for Policy Research, and we'll have also Vadym Miskyi, who is the program director of the Detector media public organization. He'll talk about how the communities are highlighted in media. We start with Valeriia, who will present the research for us. Please tell us about the major trends, where the civil society is heading, and what the rest of the society should know about this sphere. Thank you very much. Listen, I was given a task to start from a little retrospective, so we'll talk about the last 10 years, and then I'll talk about our vision. Where are we going? So the task to describe how the civil society is working is almost impossible to reach within 10 minutes, but we have conducted helpful research. You will see the evolution of this index, of the stability of the development of the organizations of civil society in Ukraine. For many years, it's been funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development, who were, since 2022, we've been doing this research supported by the International Renaissance Foundation. We're very grateful to this because this allows us to follow the changes, and then this is being implemented into different documents like the National Strategy of the Development of the Civil Society. It helps the public sector, the academic sector, and every average citizen to understand where the civil society is heading. We can see the dynamics, how this has been changing. The methodology takes into account 7 different indexes: financial stability, advocacy, providing services, public image, and some others. These 7 indexes are evaluated separately, and then the index of stability is being drawn. There's a certain dynamic starting from 2014, and we have to have in mind that the lower the assessment is, the mark is, the higher the stability is. And of course, starting from 2014, which is a definitive year for Ukraine that has shaped the vector where our state is heading, in the direction of democracy, in the direction of Europe, and our public organizations were actively involved in this, then we may see a certain deterioration in this in 2017, 2018. Unfortunately, our authorities had an intention to somehow limit the activity of NGOs. However, after this, the situation started to level up a bit, but we had a major crisis during this period, like the COVID, then the war. However, the stability of organizations and the resilience has grown, and they showed themselves as able organizations that can react to the demand of the society. And of course, the start of the full-scale invasion has shown this very vividly. You can also see certain dynamics where every index is concerned. And I remind you that if they go down, this is good. If we talk about where we are at the moment, of course, the number of NGOs has grown, especially charity organizations, because this was a response to the demand that arose to involve money to help the armed forces, and the public organizations are still involved in this. I have to note here that the advocacy capability has grown very much, and every negotiation group has now representatives of NGOs. I think that this shows a strong capacity and capability. The weakest index was financial stability. This trend is improving. However, 2025, of course, was not helpful in this because USAID's disinvolvement has impacted negatively on NGOs' activity. You may see from the responses that many organizations have suffered as a result of this. They had to cut on staff, they had to cut on activities. However, many organizations did find their way out of this situation, and the European Union, of course, has to assume the role of the biggest donor. I think that in principle the EU will cope with this well. However, they need some time for this, as EU needs some time for everything. Now we see that international donors look at the need of localization of great big funds. However, we have one qualification here. This should not be monopolization of the situation. We have to work on the diversifying financial sources. We see that we are very much dependent on international funds. And I think that Europe is now on the threshold of the next crisis. They have to overcome their own challenges, so we have to think about this. However, we continue to work, and in reality, the public sector, well, I cannot imagine any sphere of the nation's life where they would not be present. It's the military sector, it's also diplomacy, because many NGOs are sort of a shadow diplomats who help to strengthen our positions abroad. I think this is a titanic, gigantic work. I hope that this unique experience that we gained over the last years we will use. Thank you very much. By the way, Maksym and Vadym have joined us. Please hand the mic over to Maksym Latsyba. We talked about some advocacy capability of the public sector, and we think that this is a unique market proposal to anyone else. But still, I would like to ask about 3 or 4 major trends, not in retrospect, but what is happening now. Is it true that the public influences the decisions on local level or national level, and do we influence the decisions about Ukraine abroad? Thank you. However, we still have to look back for a moment in order to see what's going to happen next. Yes, the index of stability does show that we have a rather high level of the influence of NGOs, especially if we compare this to the EU countries. The NGOs in Ukraine are much more influential where the government decisions are concerned. They communicate more often and the results are better. In the EU, the major players of the public sector are trade unions and employers' organizations. This is classics. So Ukraine is not only Russia, but it's not Europe as well. But we will see who will integrate into where. We understand the process of Euro integration as if Ukraine had to adjust itself to archaic forms of the EU invented 50 years ago. However, when the turbulence in the world rises, and this will happen inevitably because many countries want those crises to become often and often, we will see which model is more vital and who will borrow from whom. I think that the process of Euro integration is also about the learning of German, Spanish, and Italian government about how they work in Ukraine. And for instance, the German government has already said that they will go to some digital solutions that were pioneered in Ukraine. Of course, the norms that are 100 years old are the way to lose in the international competition. So the NGOs in Ukraine are the labs where new approaches and new decisions are being worked out and then offered to the government. Well, I'm not as optimistic as my colleague is. I think that the trend here in this country is bad, and the influence of the public society, of the public sector, is falling compared to 2014 or 15. After the revolution of dignity, the influence was much bigger, and there was a higher readiness on the part of authorities to listen to it. Most of the reforms that we are proud of were written by public NGOs, like, for instance, the decentralization reform, and we cannot but mention the rehabilitation package of reforms package, and we have worked out the prompts to our MPs, which was the idea of Vadym Miskyi. I remember that we were standing by the walls of the parliaments handing out those prompts to our MPs, so this reform is doing quite a lot. They are solving quite a lot of problems. The election code, we have forgotten about this. There were many patrol police, by the way. Of course, this was written together with international partners and NGOs. Then the reform of public purchases, if you remember, and the law on public purchases was written by NGOs. Yes, the rehabilitation reform package was a unique idea which has to be studied and disseminated. This was the union of the strongest NGOs, and by the way, the trade unions were there as well, and the working groups were working out different proposals, and there was readiness on the part of the authorities to listen. We actually met every faction in the parliament. We had a platform with MPs where we met every Friday after the week of work, and we were talking about the next week, about amendments and all this. The dialogue lasted for several years. We met the Prime Minister Groisman every 3 months in his office, and we were talking about every reform. Prime Minister Shmyhal has never met the public, and President Zelensky, over the 6 years of his term, has only once, early this year, met the representatives of civil society. However, President Poroshenko met the public quite often. Maybe he did not want to do this, but he did. And he listened to criticism. So I would say that the influence of civil society is falling. I think that 2019 was the crisis in the relations between the authorities and society, civil society. There was not only ignoration, but there were also different attacks on the civil society. Like, for instance, on Mr. Shabunin, there were 100 attacks a year on public activists, civil activists, and there were no investigations and no protection. The authorities did not react to this. They provided the opportunity to criminals to deal with activists. Then the laws by MP Dubinsky, which were about persecuting public activists. But the first onslaught on the civil society was launched by Mr. Poroshenko and his party, the then president. And they said, oh, okay, the dreams of the Maidans are over. We shall deal with them in our own way. But of course, the capability and the capacity of civil society is very important. We have to work feasible and plausible solutions. At the moment, I would say that the public organizations and analytical centers have weakened. Many people went to the front. Many people perished. Many went to the bodies of power. Some of them remain open to the dialogue, but some of them have become different people. They have become members of the authorities. So they authorize, they do not talk to other people. They do not want to listen to civil society. Of course, many people went abroad, especially women, because of the security factors. So the sector has weakened. In 2014-15, we had less procedures for interaction, but more desire from the authorities to listen. And the situation is reversed now. The war, 2022, the invasion has really changed the map of the activity of civil society. The humanitarian sector has grown, monitoring sector has diminished. We went to look for drones for humanitarian aid, and here the authorities said, okay, we see your usefulness, And of course, the attitudes since 2022 have changed, and maybe now some people sense the elections in the air, so they have raised their level of attention and they have actually launched some suppression. But I would say that the era of undeclared cooperation has started. The Prime Minister Shmyhal has not, for instance, met the civil society representatives once. He maybe is following some role models, and of course Yulia Sviridenko, the new Prime Minister, has not met civil society yet. She only wants to hear applause when she's on the stage, but the sector of humanitarian aid has grown. And on the level of local self-government, there is some cooperation, but of course that's because the local governance in the hands of other political forces than the Sluga Narodu, servant of the people. And where veterans and other problems are concerned, many authorities have understood that they cannot do without civil society. But of course we have to, the document about tomorrow, about the next year, is still a closed box, and the authorities want to plan themselves. Okay, the plan for community development, you can talk about this for 20 times over, but the local budgets are still inaccessible. Same as the general plan of territorial development. These key issues, both in Kiev or in Lviv, are the closed issues. Independent on the political parties, whoever is in power, we still have to convince mayors that we are reliable partners who may work out stable decisions. And the last thing, Euro integration is the real chance to change everything. And for me here, it is not only important to become the member of the European Union, but how we become. Because we don't want just to cross the T's and dot the I's. We have to build a society and a state that provides security and dignity. And in reality, the process of Euro integration calls upon the change of many laws. There was a rather inclusive process of creating the roadmap. The government has confirmed 4 Euro integration maps, but we have been given a fishing rod and we have to catch the fish. I would say that the ministries at the moment, in the October 2025, are even more prepared to listen than we are prepared to give. We are lagging behind in proposing and suggesting legal legislation proposals, and you know there's Euro Commission already involved who say give us screening, give us this. And if previously we had to go to the party committee in Moscow, now we have to go to the commission in Brussels. So civil activists become good aids for free, and I do call upon the civil society to become more active, not only in anti-corruption, but in the production sphere, reforming, in transportation, in education. I suggest that the sphere of the work of NGOs should be expanded. I see now that the new ministries, because of the pressure of Euro integration and their support at the level of President and Prime Minister, we have unique opportunities to help state to provide reforms for the sake of Ukraine. Mr. Vadym, isn't this being covered by the media, and why it is not covered? And especially this relates to the regional dimension, because of course key organizations have some things to do, but Maksym, thank you very much for this wave of memories that has touched upon not only myself but many other people about the reform package, rehabilitation reform package, and this wave of activity in 2014, 2015, until the first wave of attacks against anti-corruption activists, which actually started still when Mr. Poroshenko was the president, and then it undermined the opportunity for the cooperation between the civil society and authorities. And of course, the political elite was changed, and they have undermined the policy, the order that was established after the Maidan, and the authorities have started to raise barriers against them. However, they were in the know that the street can help them, but they can also demand. In the media, the trend was the same. Approximately after the Revolution of Dignity, there was quite a lot of civil society voices and media. However, in 2019, and generally between the full-scale invasion, social networks were telling about, were naming the NGOs and civil society as Soros sucklings, but of course the Russian propaganda was also taking part in this, and I think that the political elites in our country were under the same impression, and the communication was not there. Of course, in the media, the narrative was there, and I found the Institute of Mass Information Research for 2021, where they said that 8 out of 10 pieces on civil society in media were neutral, and they were there both as experts and newsmakers. 1 out of 10 was positive, and 1 out of 10 was brightly negative. And of course, in Telegram channels, the non-professional players were, non-professional media were dominating, including those who were controlled by the Kremlin. The full-scale invasion has raised the visibility of civil society, including in part due to the volunteers initiatives. We had a lot of NGOs and charity foundations that appeared there, and actually volunteers became a force by themselves. And maybe the trust towards volunteers is different from the trust to public organizations, civil society organizations. Another research conducted by Jednania says that over the 9 months of the full-scale war, month after month, the number of mentions of civil society has grown tenfold. So this was an explosion in development. Of course, 2022 helped to make civil society more visible, in particular because the Center for Civil Liberties got the Nobel Peace Prize. But of course, this was also discussed from different angles, because Russians and Belarusians were among the winners then. But again, this is a absolutely new level of attention in the global dimension. So what has changed the level of attention, including the Ukrainian and international media? Because there was a new demand for transparency. People began to expect more transparency, first of all from volunteers and CSOs, including reports. And remember how people started to demand to publish reports about how the money was spent after the collection. And of course, the effective communication is about explaining why you are doing this, but not just calling, let's go there, let's do this. You have to explain why you're fighting for this. I would say that this visibility and attention have ceased to develop explosively. Maybe there's even a bit of decline in this respect. And I would advise to put the emphasis in the communication of CSOs. This explosive development you can, of course, to some extent convert into stability. However, in the first place, this is transparency, and the stability, the continuous explanation about what we are here for, including the financial issues and transparency in them. Secondly, this is professionalism in communication and stability in communication, which raises visibility. The communication plan of the organization, the understanding of territory and target audiences. Not every big CSO has a dedicated communication people. You understand that this is not just an SMM, a person who is responsible for your image and media. We can be brilliant experts, but still not understood by broad public. So in this respect, you can address specialists. There's nothing shameful in this. The business does this in order to be understood by the people, and the civil society should do this as well. And of course, humanity and personalization of communications. Media love stories, and we know that it is easier to get into media if you have the analytical report with numbers, because the numbers in headlines do raise the number of publications. If there are stories, this means that you do not only make it to the headlines, but you also make it to the hearts of your target audience. And this personalization of stories about who your beneficiaries are, how your activity influenced their lives, what has improved, is a very, very weighty and often underestimated tool of communication of civil society. So tell stories about you, look for stories about you. There was a situation when the donors taught Ukrainian civil society to write stories in order to report to their grantors. And I remember that many CSOs were irritated by this because they were writing reports anyway. But really, what has changed in the life of civil society is that this is needed by the society from which we expect help. So I do advise to tell stories, which, Oleksandra, I would like to ask you, Kyiv is understood, the powers, the authorities are here, you can walk to the government quarters, and the central media is here, but what we do on the black soil level, on the level of oblast or district or territorial community, as far as regions are concerned, we can say that on the one hand, this is simpler, but on the other hand, this is more complicated. If we talk about the civil sector on the level of territorial communities, I would name the major trends that are here now. And here I would talk about mostly about organizations that were set up after 2022. What is the challenge there? First, this is whether they have the strategy in their organization, whether they have the understanding where they are going within the next 3 years. When I say why 3 years, people say that I don't always know what to do tomorrow. But the issue is that if we develop strategy for a certain period, we talk about our values, what the environment that we want to create in our communities. And of course, this is the issue that can relatively be impacted on by COVID or the war. And this helps when you understand what you want to create within the 3 next years. And this helps to look at the tactics and operational goals, what specifically I will do. We are facing processes here, and if there's no strategy in the organization, there's a lot of processes that are not balanced, and there's overload of the team that works for this, and then there's burning out because of this. And many activists who talk to us, they say that after some period, including volunteer organization, they say we can't pull it anymore. We have quite a lot of proposals about psychological support, but the issue is that volunteers or civil society activists are the people who believe that they can do everything or anything. On the one hand, this is good, but then the time comes when people just lie down and do not want to do anything. And of course, this concerns not only the public sector, but also not only the civil society sector, but also those people who go to local government. And this is unbalanced, the lack of balance between your capacities and your aims. Of course, there are challenges with financing, and many organizations do not have an experience of involving money. On the other hand, they are more open than the organizations that have been there since 1990s, who did not get used to work with the business or directly with citizens, but only with donors. And the new organizations say, okay, let's try this. This preparedness to be more flexible does help organizations on local level, not only to survive, but also to develop. I have quite a lot of examples of such organizations. Another moment, and the people were talking about this, there are different moments in relations with local government. There are positive and negative features. The positive feature is when the civil society organizations falls within the niche of the demand of local authorities, like work with IDPs or military veterans, or they can involve a grant for the territorial community, and the authorities are reasonable enough to understand that this is not competition but martyrship, then this is all okay. But if they do not fit within the demands and requirements of local authorities, we can hear the phrase, this is not timely. And I think not timely is one of the worst factors that influence monitoring processes or ecological initiatives, environmental initiatives, or cultural initiatives, which are really very, very important. We are fighting for our identity now, not only for territories, who we are, what we are. When the public organizations raise the issue of CSOs, raise the issue of culture and are being told that this is not timely, my question is what we are fighting for. Maksym said that often local self-government bodies are more inclined to work with NGOs about strategy plans and development plans. Yes, okay, but we are not prepared to involve money from international donors. But the question is how you understand how to work with the community if you do not know where you will be within 5 years. So it is very important to explain to local organizations, NGOs, that this is not about a spot task, but about years and a broad span. And this also, if we are involved, this provides us with an opportunity to influence local processes. Another moment that I would like to dwell upon is the policy of transparency mentioned today. And if we talk about strategy, there's also the huge personnel issue. On the one hand, we lack. There are not enough specialists. We have either super professional people who are prepared to do something very, very important and innovative for huge money, or people who do not have any experience in implementing this. We have to grow these people. There are quite a lot of CSOs who have been working for this for quite some time, teach new personnel, teach new people, raise them. And I would also like to comment on what the people said about the national level, about the influence on the national level. One of our achievements of the civil society is that we have the law on public consultations. And this does provide us with an opportunity to influence the adoption of decisions directly. There's a norm which is not liked by many organizations, that this law is enacted after the martial law, after the war. However, we have been able to achieve constant consultations with the Verkhovna Rada, with our ministries, with the help of our partners like National Democratic Institute. This provided us with an opportunity to shape a basis where, when MPs actually address us with the question, can you hold consultations? And we have even more demand for consultations than we can implement because of a number of factors. And this, of course, reflects what Maksym was telling. There's a lot of demand from ministries, but we're not always capable of working with it. And to sum this up, I would say that first, personnel and the development of people, and I think that here we can learn from some countries of the European Union, the civil education, where they start from the kindergarten, not only from the school. We are talking about schools now, but they are doing this from the kindergarten. Then mentorship for CSOs on regional level, because this helps us to develop civil society, and these people become our partners in promoting reforms. And then the preparedness, the readiness to get partnerships not only with donors, but also with the business, with the normal self-government bodies, and launch new approaches to the involvement of average people, as many volunteer organizations do. And because we're talking about money, we go to Evelina. I like your association. We were talking about the special case of charity foundations. Your organization, Razom for Ukraine, is well known for successful work in the USA. What is happening there with the involvement of money? What are the trends? Listen, first, I am fully in agreement with the colleague that this is not only about money, it's about people as well. These are the two components that are what the civil society does. When we're talking about resource, I often replace money with resources because this is not necessarily money. This is experience, this is intention, this is quite a lot. Very important is I call upon you not to think about only about what you can get. We are talking about inspiring Ukraine and the world. I will be cynical. We have to sell this product to the donors so that they like us. We have quite a lot to inspire with. We've been at war since 2014, and regrettably, there's not a lot of products. And in 2022, for instance, we had to anew set up different support centers, normative documents, and all this. We have to understand that we do this not for the sake of doing. We do this for the sake of using the experience later. And further, I agree with the reserved optimism, and I also am a reserved optimist because I have the long life line. I do believe that there will be a crisis in Europe. I'm just interested in when it happens. This is a different issue for me, and I have telephone calls about how you purchase tourniquets, for instance, international tourniquets. They do not know that the Ukrainian produce is good, but they are not certified in different other countries. Can we do something different in Ukraine? Can we change in Ukraine? Yes, we can, but we have to organize the certifying center here. We are not very much involved in cooperation with different state bodies because we are absolutely convinced that we should not replace them. We have to be next to them, close to them, but not inside. And this helps us to push the issues, including some systemic changes. About the resource that we get abroad, there's a very good example. This is a story about people, personalization. We have an unbelievable project, which was the project that I went to the Razom for Ukraine, this is the co-pilot project when we bring nurses and sergeants into Ukraine where they teach local people, local colleagues to work with different traumas. Sometimes we bring also medical stuff with us, but they do probe this in practice. Think about this. Maybe you have some institutions, associations abroad who can share this experience because there will be less and less finance, but there will be more and more spots where this finance is needed. Yes, we are looking at the money that Razom for Ukraine is raising, and we've been working in the USA since 2014, but I will talk about 2022. In 2022, we had the peak of our collection. We had some collections open even before the full-scale invasion because we expected this, and we wanted to buy some stuff and equipment and train people even before, which allowed us to start to fill in those budgets since the first days of the invasion. But then we saw decline. And let's be frank, someone others pain pains less. What do you know about Syria? What do you know about somewhere? Not in detail. What have you done in order to support those people? And that's why our pain is not aching with other people. Let's find what we can offer them. We have to talk to individuals. We have to work with individuals who will understand us and want to support us. Sometimes there has to be a systemic donor who want changes, who want to see something that they can use with themselves. There may be institutes like mental health centers that can use our experience. They will send specialists here who will learn here and use in their nations. And again, when we talk about the quantitative rise in the public sector, in the CS sector, I am a financier. We were talking whether they count those who have closed down or who are. I remember that in Ukraine, the civil society movement was a volunteer society. This is something additional to your work. But if we want to work with the international community, we have to be professional. And here we think about the crisis of personnel, about international audit, about transparency, and we can, in the final count, to talk similar languages with them. English, German, we have to understand this. So people, money, professionalism, transparency, there's quite a lot for us to do, and I'm quite sure that we are working with some of them, with the producers of mobile stabilization points, Ukrainian medical equipment. These are unbelievable products that have caused interest in the world. We have to concentrate on such products which will become more numerous. Apart from being the support for different people, this is also money for the state budget, so we don't relax. We are reservedly optimistic, and we have to treat this as a task to be solved. We cannot allow the luxury about whom we have to be within 5 years. We have to think how we reach the aims. Okay, to sum it up, first of all, stability of civil society has grown, but the influence on the state has diminished. we have the window of opportunity. This is the Euro integration track. We understand that NGOs have to embark on the way of professionalism, and we still have the lack of resources and personnel. The number of crises is growing, and we have to understand that we have to keep in mind the communication component. We can now have some questions from the floor. If you want to ask something, please raise your hand. Okay, I will ask. My question is, where shall we take the money within the next year or two, taking into account the lack of American money and the fact that many organizations were still thinking that the money will appear from somewhere? What's the way out? Well, I'm into the legislation for civil society. I will also try to answer the question where the money is. The Ukrainian Independent Center for Policy Research says that we have to rely more and more on yourself and diversify your sources. Do you have to take money from the citizens, from the business? Do you have to set up the fund? Yes, yes. Because you have started with the business, the colleague heads Razom for Ukraine Charity Foundation. In Ukraine, they were registered in 2016, and according to the law that was adopted in 2012, which was the advocacy campaign of our organization, and this is not a secret, but who gave the money for this? The money came also from Renat Akhmetov, from Renat Akhmetov foundation called For Ukraine, and they gave something like $30,000 in hryvnia in order to write this law and promote this law and adopt this law. Yes, we have to take money from the business. We took money from Akhmetov, and that's why this law was adopted in 2016. Before this, there were regional charity foundations, and for instance, if you wanted to set up an international fund, you had to pay $200 for registration. Now many organizations are working with the Ukrainian business, with retail, with the Ukrainian charity exchange, because these are normal cases of cooperation. Same when the business has some money, they want to help a hospital. It is cheaper for the business to do this through a charity foundation. Give the money to the charity, and then the charity will... I'll try to make the question sharper. If the civil society leans on the money of donors, they were often afraid to use the money from the business, and the business, of course, was using quasi-civil society organizations to promote the business and image and so on. What has changed and how this has changed? Another new source is contracts with the state for charity organizations. The services of the Resilience Center, for instance, the state has allocated $1 billion hryvnia for this in communities, and this is a huge market now. I know organizations that have tens of millions of hryvnia for this. One organization can open tens and dozens of such centers. And of course, they can pay something like 30,000 hryvnia. And in a territorial community, this is very good money. But the civil society organizations have not come to this market. So now the state is pulling back. The provision of social services is a huge market for civil society organizations, and that's what they do in Europe. 60% of social services in Germany is being done by civil society organizations for the money of the federal budget. Razom for Ukraine shows us that they work in Ukraine, but they collect money all over the world. Yes, our economy is dwindling. The war goes on. There's less and less money, so we have to learn to raise money abroad. By the way, the European Commission has to become the major commissioner of analytics from Ukraine. European organizations sell their produce to first Euro Commission and then media. It is difficult with us, with the media now. Well, media and earn are antonyms. Oleksandra, Evelina, please be concise. Where to get money? Yes, the situation with the business can be, but I would pay attention to the fact of the essence of the activity of public organization. There's an ethical code that says whom we can work with because we have similar values and whom we will never work with. And then there's no issue, no question about whom we cooperate with. For instance, the situation with our organization, we earlier had quite a chunk of money from the USAID, but now our major donors are Austrian and Finnish businesses who have set up their funds, and we are working with them. Same as with the Ukrainian business. We see partners in them because we have similar values. So we are working with them. What Maksym was saying is a very good mechanism, but I would also add an opportunity to work with local self-government bodies because there are participation budgets in some communities. Some communities are buying services from CSOs. However, the question is about communication campaign. No one actually forbids you to come and make acquaintance with authorities, especially if the community has strategy, especially if those strategies overlap. You can directly quote the documents and arrange cooperation. And if we are talking about residents, this is what you were talking about, the values, the value of what we are creating as partners, and the part of some citizens are willing to donate. And on the one hand, of course, there's more load on public organization, on a CSO, because you have to more effort. But of course, if USAID has withdrawn, this is not the reason to stop acting. Can we work with the business? Well, you should not generalize. Not everyone may work with the business or work in foreign countries. I will talk about the USA. They have different licenses that are being issued to CSOs, and they have their normative, for instance, normative limitations. If we're talking about military, it is almost nowhere in the world they think of this as a charity organization. Then there are different tax things. For instance, in the USA, they deduct the amount they donated from their taxes. So we have to think about this as well. I do agree with the ethical code, but do not limit yourself to this. The donor most often comes to the product. We have cases when the donors came to us because they knew with whom we work in certain hospitals, and they came to us and said that we want to work with you. Ekstrenka in Odessa Oblast, the emergency help in medical aid in Odessa Oblast, they are all equipped with radios that we gave them, and even when there's no electricity, they will work. Well, we have bought tens of thousands of portable radios, and when the donor has got to know about this, they said, we want to broaden this experience to other regions as well. So we should remember and not generalize. Thank you very much. We shall generalize, sum it up. Now, about the regulatory policy of the state, during the next discussion, I hope that you will all come to take part to understand how the state should approach this. Thank you very much. We had representatives of civil society, and I wish you flourishing and successful work. Thank you very much.